So I'm titling this, Have the Chinese Stepped Up Their Game on These Little ATVs? I got this from my little 5-year-old daughter. Wasn't going to spend the money on a name brand bike, even a used one, because I've had enough used ATVs to know they're hit and miss. You don't know how they were maintained or where they were done, how they were ridden, what they were ridden in. So I decided to get a new one. I wasn't going to pay $2,000 for a 50cc ATV, not even knowing if my daughter would take interest in it. To me, that's not getting what you paid for. It's just too much to spend on a first ATV that they're going to outgrow soon. But anyway, the reason I'm asking, did they step their game up? One of the biggest issues with these Chinese ATVs that I read was two things. Well, first of all, the electrical, and secondly, loose nuts coming off all over the bike, which is primarily probably from people who didn't initially go through the ATV, check every nut and bolt, make sure everything was tightened properly, which I did. Now I will say, I know I read a lot that if you're not comfortable turning wrenches, then this might not be the ATV for you. I've been a diesel mechanic, I'm an electrical designer, a mechanical designer for piping and offshore equipment, so I have a pretty extensive background in electrical and mechanical work. So I'm not afraid of turning a wrench. I'm not afraid of having to work on it and fix any little issues that come up. It's not a problem at all. Even electrical ones, even though electrical can get tricky with these because they have a kill switch that turns off the ignition. They have an alarm, all this stuff. So that can get a little tricky without a wiring diagram, but still, it was worth it to me. So this morning I uncrated it, and the first thing I did, I didn't even unbolt it off the metal cage that it comes in. I basically just took the top off, left it bolted to the bottom, and I went through every nut and bolt on this bike. Now, one thing I'll say about the nuts and bolts on this bike are, I know that in the past it's been a problem with nuts and bolts coming loose. This ATV, almost every bolt on this ATV, from the shocks to the plastic nuts, are all Teflon lined. So they're self-locking. Now I don't know if that's new, but even when you try to tighten them, if you try to loosen them, you have to have a wrench to hold the nut on the back. I'm sorry about the focusing. But so these nuts aren't going to just work themselves loose, even with the vibration. Now I don't know if that's new or recent, but I still took them off. I still put Loctite on them. Every nut and bolt on this bike, the ones for the rack up here, the ones I checked all the front end nuts and bolts, made sure everything was tight. I went through the whole bike. Now these, anything that has a welded nut, such as this, well, that's actually not a welded nut, but the back rack has welded nuts, so you just have a bolt. Now those aren't Teflon lined. These aren't Teflon lined, of course. But everything else, pretty much every nut and bolt on this bike is Teflon, has a Teflon nut on it, which is very good. It's definitely a step in the right direction if this is new. I don't know. I gotta assume it is, because if it wasn't, you probably wouldn't have heard as much complaining about nuts coming loose. This is a 2015. It's the latest model. Even the exhaust nut right there had a Teflon backed nut on it. So even though it was loose, there were loose nuts on this bike. They needed to be gone over and they needed to be tightened up, which I did. So that's for sure. Now, as far as the headlights, I know there's problems with people say get a balloon and wrap rubber around it and all this. Well, it's already got a rubber cup now. I don't know if it used to. I pulled that headlight out. I checked the wiring. The wiring wasn't bad. I might resolder some of it. Just depends. I'm not sure. I think it's fine. I looked at it pretty good, and I didn't see a problem with just being just the way it is. I will probably squirt some waterproof grease in that hole to try and seal it just a little bit, maybe. This isn't going to be a mud bike. It's for my little daughter. She's not going to mud it. So that's not a problem really. But at any rate, paint job, the paint on is actually really pretty. It's a burgundy, it's a very pretty color. Really like it. I haven't put the battery in yet, so I haven't cranked it. First thing I'm gonna do is, I've got to drain that crap oil out of there, and I'm gonna put some good synthetic oil in it. Another thing that everybody says you have to do to these is put a fuel shutoff. Well, if you look right here, it already has it. So this one came with a fuel shutoff. It also came, I don't know if you can see it, it also came with a fuel filter. Again, I'm sorry about the focusing. It's hard to get this thing to focus, but there you go, you can see it. There's a fuel filter in there. So it already had that. So it does have the crappy spark plug, so I'll be changing that, which is right there. Yes, the dipstick, oil dipstick, which is way down there behind the plastic, right there. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt, but that's not a big deal. I don't really mind that. But everything else on the ATV, I'm not unhappy with it at all. For what you pay, I paid $789 shipped for this ATV. It came to my door. Easy to put together, really easy. I'd already watched several videos for assembly of these, more than anything just to see, you could see a lot just as far as the quality and how these things go together. Was part of my decision making, was watching those videos to see how these things go together and the parts involved. And it's very easy to assemble. It didn't come with instructions. It did come with a DVD. I didn't watch it. I'd watched enough assembly videos. I really didn't need anything to help me get it together. I put it together no problem. Took to tighten all the nuts and bolts, check everything as far as that goes. It took me about, I want to say an hour, maybe an hour and a half to get the whole bike put together. And that's lock tighten nuts and bolts, a lot of them, not every single one, but most of them. And you had to put on the back rack, you had to put on the handlebar, the plastic piece up between the handlebars had to be put on, the steering arms had to be put on, the brakes had to be, well, they don't really bolt on, they just slip onto the axle, and you have to make sure the notch locks it into place so it don't spin. And the back tires, other than that, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to assembling these things. It's very simple. The chain is adjusted good, no problems there. So this, again, it's going to be a couple weeks before my daughter gets this. So I won't be able to do a whole lot in the way of reviewing it as far as the mechanical as running it and stuff like that. But so this is just a review of the fit finish. I wanted to talk about those Teflon back nuts. I wanted to talk about the fuel shutoff, which is added. It does have a fuel filter. Not sure if that stuff was was part of the older bikes. Another complaint was a lot of people say that the welds on these things are really bad. I don't find that to be true. I weld, you see right there, I weld stainless, I've welded aluminum, I've welded a lot of different kinds of metals, and I've done quite a bit of it. And are they beautiful welds? No, they're not. I mean, you can see here, the weld, it's not that great. But it's not structurally unsound. It's just not a pretty weld. And there's a difference between pretty and structurally unsound. You can't really, probably not gonna be able to see that. On that one, I'm sorry about the lighting. Here's another weld, let's see. Not easy to see on here, I know, but it's not a bad weld. These aren't welds that I'm concerned with cracking or breaking. There's another one. Is it pretty? No. That's all right. I don't need pretty. I just need it to be strong and I need it to hold. A lot of people said there was a lot of tack welds. I don't see tack welds on this bike. Even right here where the rack mounts, it's a solid weld. It's not a tack. That's a structurally solid weld from top to bottom and all the way around. So see that weld right there? That's a pretty ugly weld. Ain't no getting around it. But that's, you know, again, I'm not worried about it being pretty. As far as being square, this frame, maybe I got lucky. The frame on this bike is not out of square. It might be a tiny bit. If it is, it's not enough to worry about. It's not enough for me to worry about. I took a couple measurements. I did a visual check. The bike is not out of square at all. I mean, I'm sure they put these things in a jig, these frames, when they weld them. And if the jig is square and they put it in properly, the bike's gonna come out fine. And building a jig is kind of a one-time thing. You know, there's no reason not to build it square. So for a bike to not be welded square, I'm not really sure how that happens. I know it does because I've seen pictures of other people's bikes online and they were out of square. No doubt about it, but this one isn't. Again, maybe I got lucky. So I'll do another video later after I have this thing up and running. I'm going to break it in myself. I'm going to run it for 10-15 minutes. I'm going to ride it around the backyard, make sure everything works, everything's tight, and then before we pass it along to the 5-year-old. And we got a couple acres that I built a little track around it. It's kind of it's a future home site, and I built a little track around it for my daughter to run around. So hopefully she'll enjoy that. But then again, she might do it once and never want to do it again, which is the reason I didn't want to spend $2,000 on a new 50cc ATV or $3,000 on one a little larger. That doesn't make any sense to me. So there it is. Just wanted to go through this. Please leave comments. If you have an older one and it has the Teflon backed nuts and they still back out, please notate, because I don't see how they can. I mean, work themselves out if they're just tightened moderately tight. The Teflon back nut shouldn't just back off by itself. But if they do, let us all know. Let us know if you have fuel shutoff valves on your older ones, if you have fuel filters, and maybe we can get some differences between the 2015 and the older bikes. Maybe they have taken some small steps to try and improve these things. They've listened to, hopefully they've listened to some of the complaints and addressed them. So there it is. I wanted to let everybody know that some of those problems could have been resolved. I'm sure the comments will clear it up, and anybody looking to get these. Oh, you know what I just noticed? That's weird. There's no name badge on this side for it being a 125, but there's one on this side, which I will probably peel off anyway, so who cares? So there it is anyway. I'll post further videos when we get it out there in the dirt, see how it does.